John Kurtz back here on the channel, joined by TJ Pittinger from College Football Addiction. Great channel that you guys should all go check out. Appreciate the time, TJ. As always, look, ACC Media Days coming up this week, which I know you will be in attendance for. There's so much talk about playoff format right now that's dominating a bunch of the discussion. We've got the 5+11 format versus 4-4-2-2. Jim Phillips in the ACC, we know, are on board with 5+11, along obviously with Brent Yormark and seemingly most of the SEC right now. How do you expect Jim Phillips to handle this when it comes to public comments? Like, what is he going to say? What will the tone be out of Jim Phillips in the ACC as it regards the playoff discussion?
He's always super positive, right? Like even in the midst of last year being there and, his two biggest brands in the middle of a lawsuit with him, he was also always still super positive, which, we give Jim Phillips a lot of crap, from the ACC side. He was dealt an impossible hand. Now, do I think he did everything well? No. Do I think maybe Yormark or somebody else could have? But we give Jim Phillips a lot of flack for basically not being born on third base like Tony and Greg were, right? So yeah, I do think he'll maintain a lot of positivity. I think he'll talk about, I think a big talking point will be how they got two teams into the college football playoff last year. I think he'll use that as whether true or not, I think he'll use that to show that they're better than the Big 12 and they're just one team behind the SEC. I think he will mention both of those things specifically to try and narrow the gap between the team ahead, the conference ahead of him, and to try and, in theory, widen the gap but for the conference behind him. And I think he'll also talk about Miami being just on the outside of that. I think he'll talk about Florida State deserving a spot the year before and say, like, look, we've got 3-4. I mean, Louisville was right there. If they don't lose to Kentucky late in 2023, and then obviously lost to Florida State in the ACC championship too. So I think he'll talk about the strength of the conference, whether that's real or not, is maybe up for debate. But I think that will be his messaging of, look, we can get 3-4 teams. We've got teams that are either were in last year, were right on the doorstep of being in. He may talk about Miami, maybe even deserving to be in because they had a better record than the team that finished one spot out in Alabama. I think that will be his messaging, and to justify the 5-11 model that he prefers, that the ACC seems to prefer. I think that will be what his plan of attack of, look, we were right there on the doorstep last year. We got, the third most teams in of all the major conferences. We will be right on the doorstep of doing that again. He'll hype Clemson. He'll hype the teams that are competing. He'll talk about Georgia Tech having a good showing against FSU and UGA. And so he'll be super positive. He'll be super upbeat. Funny enough, Phillips, the walls could be absolutely caving in, which they seem like they were last year, right? And there's more stability now for sure. But I think he'll maintain that real positivity. He'll talk about the strengths of the conference. There will be no shots. He won't do anything thinly veiled. He's very PR oriented, and so he won't do any of you talked about Yormark maybe having a thinly veiled shot and some of his stuff. I wasn't expecting that from Phillips, but I do think he'll, whether real or not, try to brag as much as he can on the ACC.
It's really interesting on the Big 12 v ACC front. I was listening to the Cover 3 podcast recently, and they were going over the blue chip ratio, right? Which basically, if there's a certain threshold, I guess it's over 50% of your roster that's 4- and 5-star recruits. You're in the blue chip ratio, which means you have enough talent to conceivably win a national championship. And Bud Elliott was saying, well, hey, the ACC has 3 teams here, obviously in Florida State, Clemson, and Miami that have hit this ratio. The Big 12 doesn't have anybody, and I think they said the closest out of the Big 12 was at like 20%. So his point in saying that was, I don't understand why Jim Phillips wasn't more aggressive when the conversation seemed to center around 4-4-2-2 before 5+11 was even introduced, of like, hey, why would we take the same amount of spots as the Big 12? And even as a Big 12 guy, I was like, the way everybody acts, it's so ruthless and cutthroat right now. I actually am a little bit surprised maybe that the ACC didn't go on the offensive a little bit more because of that. Like, do you feel like any of that's in Jim Phillips at some point to fight more of that battle against the Big 12? Or is it just, hey, our sights are forward on the Big 10 and the SEC, and that's what we're really focused on?
Well, not to make everything a joke, but if if you're asking me if I think that like forward thinking is something that exists within the ACC, then I'd say for the last 2 decades, probably not. And so, yeah, Bud brings up a good point. You echo it. maybe it was tough to do that in the middle. Not to give him so much. I feel like a Jim Phillips defender on here for a minute. Not to give him so much leeway here, but he was also entangled in a legal battle with two of those programs and a perennial underachiever, as I heard you say on our channel in Miami. And so, like, yes, in theory, you could use that, but like maybe it was an awkward timing to kind of use it when entrenched in a legal battle with those programs. But yeah, I mean, I think Florida State fans, Clemson fans, Miami fans, really fans of any team in this conference would appreciate that. Like, I will say the one thing, love him or hate him, the one thing Greg Sankey does is he tries to do the very best for his conference. You may not like it, you may think it's bad for the sport, but he's doing what's best for his conference. And wouldn't any of us want that if we were in the SEC or any conference? I think Big 12 fans could say the same. Like, hey, for most of the time, Brett Yormark does what he thinks is absolutely best for his conference, and then Pittinger too. And not that I think Phillips is out here trying to do things that are bad for the ACC, but like stand on the table a little bit more, right? And yeah, it shouldn't take. I mean, I like Bud. I've known him for over 10 years now. It shouldn't take Bud Elliott to have to make these points for you. You're the commissioner of a major college football conference or major, athletic conference. Go make these points yourself, man. Like, not to disparage the Big 10 at all, the Big 12, because I like the Big 12 a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think the ACC has, in theory, more teams that could go out and win a championship this year, and really for the last several years. And so, yeah, why are you not using that? Why are you not talking about that more? And maybe he will. Maybe he watches this or watches, Cover 3 or whatever, and he'll steal some talking points. But I don't know if it is in him or not, because he hasn't done that yet. And, I think that he gets lost in the weeds at times. One of my biggest complaints about being at Media Days last year is he spent like 10 or 15 minutes talking about the strength of the conference overall. He was asked a question about, revenue disparity, and he ends up talking about like women's soccer and men's lacrosse and stuff. And I'm like, listen, I get it. We want to I take my kids to all those games that are Olympic sports and things like that. I got no problems with them at all. I support financially some of those programs at FSU because I do care about them, but you're in an ACC kickoff event, right? For football. And the question was, how are you going to make up the revenue gap? And he's talking about women's soccer, and it's just that's some of the frustration I think ACC fans have with him is not that we don't care about those other things, but yeah, we want you to stand on the table and kind of fight for what moves the needle in this conference. And I'm not talking crap. Florida State was the women's soccer national championship the year he was talking about that. It was great. I loved it, but come on, man, we're here to talk about football. Stand on the table and fight for your teams a little bit.
Yeah, I completely understand. I mean, that's, even as an outsider, that's always been my perception of Jim Phillips, like a little bit wishy-washy. Now I felt like last year he actually did come across a little bit better than I would have anticipated, but I can understand the frustration, especially as an FSU guy.